Hi, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to share my journey through the completion of the FlexBox project of the Odin project web development course. I'll basically just narrate my train of thought through this project. I begin by going to GitHub account and creating a repository. Then I use the terminal to create the directory for my website. I also create the index and the CSS file. I then open my Visual Studio Code editor app and I begin by setting up my HTML head first with the meta charset and width being the device width and the tab title being the landing page. I linked my CSS sheet within my HTML. Within the body of the HTML, I begin by creating my first container, which will be the header, which is the first section of the landing page. And then within the header, I create a container called the header top, which will include the header logo and the unordered lists, which will be the links at the right of the header top. Then I make the next section, which I create by making another container within the header, and I call this the header body. I see how many containers I need to have within this main body of the header, which is just one with the text on the left and one with the picture on the right. So I make two containers, one named HB left or header body left, and this contains the title. And then I decide to commit here. It's a bit cropped out of the picture, but you get the point. The next part of the video, I open up my index of the project using the terminal and I open up VS Code. I start to see that I have a container for the header, which includes the container of the top of the header and then the container of the body of the header, which contains the title and the title subtext and the button. Next, I open up the CSS style sheet and I begin to tag the class for the header top and the UL, the unordered lists, which are the linked lists, and I add a display of flex to both of them. I also add a general style to everything by using the asterisk, and I get rid of any padding and margin. That way I have a clean slate to work with. I tag here as well the class of the header and the link reference A. For both the unordered list and the A link reference, I get rid of the default text decoration, color, and style. I begin to add the respective text and background colors. In here, I'm adding a justify content of space in between for the header top so that whatever is within that container spaces out with as much space in between as possible. I take a break here and I commit my progress so far. Next, I begin to adjust all the colors specifically and I add the specific properties to the text, such as the font size and the font weight. I search for a free royalty image to place on my header body right, and I create an image source within my HTML link with the address to my image, which I just named image, so that it's easy to link. In the styles sheet, I tag the header body container and I give it a display of flex. Then I give the class header body right a max height of 200 pixels. I add my margins to the header top class container. Next, I commit my progress. And next, I add the gapping that I need in between the links throughout the unordered links tag in the style sheet. I noticed that the very top of the header was too close to the top of the website, so I also add some padding to the top. I readjust the text colors and the necessary styling properties to the header logo. And I commit my work. Next, I adjust the fonts. I begin working on the button styling. In here, I'm showing how the flex display works to keep all the items in place while stretching and shrinking the page. I'm also showing how the text and the title don't keep expanding when I expand the page. It stays at a maximum width which I had set under the title subclass. I add more margin to the left of the image to match the PDF reference landing page. And I commit my work. Next, I move on to the next stack of the landing page and I begin setting up the HTML for it. I create a main container, which I call section 2, and within that container, I create another container for the title text, which I name H2 as in header 2, and then another container. Within that container, I am going to create the boxes, so I give it a class name of boxes, and then I create 4 containers within that container, which will be the 4 boxes. Within each of the container of each box, I create a container within it that will be the actual square, and I add a text. I span text for the text that goes underneath it. I copy and paste it 4 times, and that is what it looks like now. I stop here to commit all my progress. Now back to the style sheet, I begin to add the styling properties to H2. I begin to also style my boxes. I tag my class of the squares class, and I give it a width and a height and a border and a border radius to curve the corners of the boxes. I add a display of flex so that the boxes align horizontally, and then I commit my work again. Here I'm just adjusting the size and the color of my boxes. And next, I add a justify content of center so that my boxes stay centered as I shrink and expand the window. I also add a margin for the boxes, for the box containers, and that's what it looks like now. I add margins to the class of the section 2 container, and I align the title to the center. So far, this is how the page looks like when zooming in and zooming out. In here, I decide to add a gap and a justify content of center to the boxes class, and this is what it looks like now. I add a margin to the H2 class, which is the container for the title header of the second section, and I commit my progress again. Next, I begin on the third section of the landing page, where I create a container for the main HTML within the main HTML body, which I give a class name of section 3, excuse me. I add the 2 texts and the 1 paragraph and the span, and I commit. Next, I style the section 3 class in CSS with the respective properties that it needs. I give the quote a class and style that quote in CSS, and then I also give the span text a class name and I style that within CSS. Next, I want to make the author name flush all the way to the right of the container, so I give the section 3 container a display of flex and a direction of column so that the items are aligned in a column. Give it an align self all the way to the end, so I do a flex and for the align self. And this makes the item flush all the way to the end of the page, no matter how much we shrink or stretch the page. I commit my work again, and next we start on section 4 of the landing page. For section 4, I create a container that I call the call to action box, which will be the blue box. And then I create another container within that container where I place an H5 for the header and a span for the small text within that box. And then I create another container within the call to action container, which will be and contain the button for the sign up. Here I commit my progress. Then I tag the call to action class in CSS and I begin to give it their respective properties to turn that container into a blue box. I add some padding to the section 4 container, that way the blue box is limited within the padding of the section 4 container. And then I add a border radius to round the corners of the blue box. I add the respective font colors. And I give the contents within that blue box a display of flex so that the make an call to action button goes to the side of the text part. I create a specific class for the call to action button and I copy paste the style of the first button at the top, since it's basically the same except that it has a white border. I add a padding to the call to action box. And I also add a justify content of space around so that the items within the container get spaced with the space around them evenly. I adjust some of the padding within the blue box to make it more similar to the PDF image. And then I fine-tune some styles. I adjust some of the colors and the font styles, and I place the PDF and the landing page side by side so that I can get it as similar as possible. I commit my progress. And we begin the HTML, setting up the HTML for the footer. I commit again after I've set up all of the footer content within the HTML, and I begin styling it in CSS. For the style of the footer, I add a background color and a text color, and then I add a display of flex, which later I realized that is not necessary. The only part that is necessary is to add and align items to flex, and that way the footer is flushed all the way to the end of the page. I add some padding and font size and I commit and I turn in my project. The end.